Hi everyone, it's Nono and Aziz here, and this is one more episode of the Bytes series. We've covered in the past an introduction to the series and an episode on Stylegan, and this one is on NFTs, non-fungible tokens. We're trying to learn a bit more about cryptocurrencies and digesting the knowledge or the concepts that we have learned about in a language that hopefully we can all understand.
I mean, we're absolute amateurs in this space, I guess, but given that we have a great interest in digital culture and technology, naturally we want to be exploring it. And so we thought this would be a good idea to have a discussion between Nono and I on it. We've both kind of done our readings and we've looked up these various videos like many of you have. And so this is just an episode to perhaps get our minds together on this and try to make sense of it for us and for hopefully you guys as well. I've been looking up a lot of videos on the topic since it started on YouTube and a lot of reading some articles here by like the general media as well. And at the end of the day, you go back and you're kind of reading the same thing over and over again. It's the blockchain, it's a decentralized system, and you're always confused at the end of it. It's hard to really tackle and get to like the beef of it and get a good grasp of what it means and if it's a safe investment in the long run, if it's something that's durable and not just a bubble. Maybe we can get into some of the basic stuff in our conversation, just so you and I are on the same page, Nono, and we'll see how it goes from there and how deeper of a dive we can manage. And maybe we can get a good grasp of things and try to see or try to imagine if their future is sustainable.
I think the big question here is, are NFTs and digital art something that is here to stay, or is it just a hype and just a thing that people are trying to take advantage of? Hey, it's Nono, and this is the Getting Simple podcast. Today, the big promise is that we'll explain to you and hopefully interiorize ourselves a bit more this concept of non-fungible tokens. This is what you might see commonly referred to as NFTs or NFTs. And an NFT is something that represents ownership of a digital or physical asset, but it doesn't provide the owner with the copyright of the work. What this means is that the same way you can own a painting, holding a non-fungible token provides you with the right to display the piece, say that you're the owner, or sell it. But it doesn't give you the right to reproduce it. This is what we commonly call the copyright. Whoever holds the copyright will be the person who can charge royalties for other people to use that, or maybe prevent other people from using it. You know, this is something weird to understand with digital files, I think, because we're talking about ownership of an MP3 file or a JPEG or a video, right? Which is not something that we commonly are accustomed to. An MP3 file can be copied over to many computers, or a JPEG can be visualized by many computers. There's no cost to it. For you to understand what non-fungible items or tokens are, we can define what a fungible object is, right? Fungible means that something is replaceable. So if you put a $10 bill on a pool of $10 bills, right, on a table, you go to an event and everyone puts a $10 bill. All you care about is that you get $10 back. You don't really care if it's on digital form, if it's the bill, if it's any other way. It doesn't really matter. As long as you get back a $10 bill and you can leave the event with your money, you're fine. Bills are fungible and you care about the value of the asset, the $10 in this example, and not about the specific item. Smartphone, for instance, is non-fungible. If you go to a party, all the attendees might leave their phones at the entrance on their arrival, and each of them would want to grab their respective phones when they leave the party. You don't want to take anyone else's phone, as yours is unique and irreplaceable. You want yours back, which you own, right? In the digital world, as I mentioned before, the files that we create on a computer are fungible. We can copy them, replicate them, and send other people the same image, even without data loss. NFTs aim to replicate or reproduce the scarcity of unique physical non-fungible objects. Say, for instance, the Mona Lisa or a Picasso. But how do we create a Mona Lisa that only one person can own or only a museum can display in the digital world, right? Or the digital space. So the concept that only one person owns a song, a piece of artwork, or a looping video, it's a virtual representation of ownership.
So it's kind of like the item's unique and only one person can have ownership. It's sort of like Helen of Troy, right? There's only one Helen of Troy, and we all have to get into this bidding war to win her over, basically. That's how the NFTs are currently working right now. So someone, a creator, a creative, puts something out there, puts a piece of work out there, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a creative, right? Like the NBA is selling NFTs of their top shots.
The interesting part is the cultural significance of this NFT thing, right? Artwork has always been something really subjective. You just own a piece. You don't really know. Some people might do it because in the future that's going to be really expensive. Some people do it because they like the artist or they know personally the artist and they want to support their work. Maybe they just like how that fits at their homes. Or there's somebody who might just have collectibles and feel like NFTs might let you own a piece of a song or a piece of a shirt. And what's important is these things are digital, right? If the Mona Lisa is at a museum, it's a museum, right? Many people could agree that each of them owns a third or a fourth of it or something. And this is embedded in the nature of cryptocurrencies and blockchain and NFTs. So the concept that maybe a song is split into thousands of fragments, so fractions of a digital asset, and you can acquire not the entire thing, but like maybe 2% of it or 0.5% of it or something, and then many people contribute or own a thing. What do you think about this, like the cultural significance of a bunch of fans owning a song of Radiohead or other artists?
We're obsessed about owning the original, of having the original, being authentic. And I think that's why like the art world also obsesses about this, right? You can have replicas of a painting done by a master artist who can fool people into thinking it's a Pollock or it's a Picasso or whatever. And this has been done before, right? There are many examples of fake art being sold, but then it immediately loses its value. It's off the museum wall, even though it looks and feels and it's done masterfully, just like the original art. But because it's not genuine and because it's not authentic, because it's not the person who came up with these ideas, it's just some replica, then it loses all its value immediately. The same applies here, right? Even though it's not physical, it's owning that moment. Like the first tweet, that was a historical moment, and now somebody has claim over it in a way and can then monetize it later, sell it to someone else. It's both an investment and also being in possession of a cultural moment or a cultural...
Yeah, and we'll talk about later the implications of creating. There's effort involved. It's not like you're just going to post something on eBay and people are going to pay for it. There's some effort and some technological barriers to actually the creation process of an NFT. But in some way, you talked about the first tweet, for example. That's something that existed since Jack Dorsey tweeted for the first time. I don't know if the first tweet in history, but in 2006, right? And now in 2021, we're like revaluing that thing, that digital asset that nobody really cared about in terms of paying money or owning. But we've created this story around it that makes sense for somebody to own, right? I'll bring here a story that happened in the late 2020s. I don't really know exactly the dates, but this is the historical moment of NFTs, right? There is an artist that's Mike Winkelmann that is also known online as Beeple. You can check his Instagram account, Beeple_crap. He actually learned about the existence of NFTs for the first time last year at the end of 2020. And he had already been doing digital art for 20 years, creating what he calls everydays. This is a daily digital art piece that he published on his Instagram account for 13 years already. Or 11 years, I don't remember. He decided to tokenize a collage with his first 5,000 everydays by minting, that is the process that we'll see later, his JPEG file combining all those artworks on the Ethereum network. He generated a digital token, that's an NFT, and that token would represent the ownership of this collage, right? Not the copyright, but the ownership. And I don't know how, but he managed to auction it through Christie's. That is a well-established auction and private sales house. And what I learned is that this was the first time that an NFT was auctioned for real. On Christie's website, I read that, quote unquote, Beeple's opus created over 5,000 days by the groundbreaking artist, this monumental collage was the first purely digital artwork ever offered at Christie's, unquote. The action was a fight among two main bidders. The JPEG file ended up being sold for $69 million.
That's true. Yeah, it did get sold for 69 million. And that's where kind of the NFT world exploded, right?
Winkleman described his life as being just 16 hours a day on the computer while his wife took care of the kids. And the actual number is $69,346,250 that were paid by Binesh Sundaresan, known online as Meta Kovan, founder of MetaPurse. I don't even know what all these things mean, but this purchase is said to be, quote unquote, just a JPEG and a hyperlink. And to me, it seems like Sundaresan bought the asset to make history, being the buyer of the first NFT auction, right? And that's really important. There is a big, significant, I did this, I'm the first one, and now we're talking about him. I don't even know how this guy has so much money to pay for. Maybe he's an early cryptocurrency investor. But yeah, that seems crazy to me.
Right. And so everybody saw, wow, like you could sell something for that kind of price. I wonder what else we could sell, right? And so that's when people started selling songs and selling digital real estate now. Like you have architects designing 3D walkthroughs, these imagined spaces, and they're selling them. You have luxury apartments being built. You can walk around, you can explore this asset, and they're being sold at the price of real estate, like the same price you would buy a luxury apartment in New York. Millions of dollars are being spent here, and people are just now trying to grasp, okay, what else can we sell? What else can we do here? So once you sell something, how do you track it? And the NFTs rely heavily on the cryptocurrency, the blockchain. Because the NFTs are so linked to the blockchain and cryptocurrency, I think to quickly describe what that means is that every transaction on the blockchain is decentralized. And we've heard this word before, right? What that means is that there's a record being kept of this transaction on every single computer on this network in a way. And so if we were to kind of hack one of these computers and change ownership of a currency or change ownership of an NFT, this hack would not work because all the other computers would flag it as fake. We rely on every computer on the system to certify that the ownership is in the right hands, that the transaction is recorded and is true. And so in a way, if we go back to comparing NFTs to real world art, to determine whether a painting is real or fake, many experts use something known as provenance. And so they try to trace back the history of that artwork, the history of that ownership, all the way back to the artist's studio. And so it could start with like, okay, there's a picture of this painting in the studio. And so we know that it was actually his, and then X person who visited the studio. So they trace the history of that. And so NFTs have a much more clear history, because in the real world, tracing the history of a painting could have gaps, right? Certain periods of time where it's unknown where it was. Perhaps there was a war in this country, or this person who last owned it moved and left it behind. So there are gaps in the history of provenance, usually of artwork. But in digital currency, if there's a gap, then there's something wrong, right? So everything is recorded, everything's on this public ledger for everyone to see and everyone to fact check. Problem. So in a way, it could be a more safe investment than an investment in real artwork, which can be faked.
So not to generalize and make a few clarifications, not all the blockchains are the same, right? Like blockchain, as Aziz mentioned, is a concept of made is added there. It's linear. So we are adding things on top of each other. They're like blocks and blocks of transactions or operations added. But we have to acknowledge that there are thousands of cryptocurrencies right now. And there are like many that are like unique or really idiosyncratic and really different in nature. And as is described as like being decentralized and being like checked and flagged by other computers, Bitcoin works this way. I think Ethereum works this way. Not all of them are as public. So I think Zcash, for instance, focuses on privacy. So it keeps a lot of the transaction logs untraceable and private. So there are like many other cryptocurrencies and blockchain technologies that might have different ways of being. We're talking about NFTs, which are created inside of the Ethereum chain. And the Ethereum chain right now works with something created or called proof of work, which is many different computers called nodes around the world are given a piece of math or problem or puzzle to solve. And when they do, they are allowed to create a new block or something like this, and verify transactions. And I think they also get rewarded a certain amount of money. And, this costs money because we'll talk later about the environmental impact of all of these things. But I think Ethereum now is trying to transition into a proof of stake concept or like a way of verifying transaction that is a lot lighter. It consumes a lot less and allows for faster processing of transactions and operations. This is also based on something we won't talk about today that is called ZK Starks, that is zero knowledge proofs. You can listen to Vitalik Buterin and other people explaining. I don't understand the math, but if you go to vitalik.ca, he has a lot of publications on the topic. So yeah, at the end of the day, the cool thing is that on the Ethereum chain, every time converted or tokenized into an NFT or minted to the network, you can trace when and who created it and how much money they paid and the auction process and all of these things. Of course, whatever happened to the artwork before the chain is exactly the same as any other digital file that hasn't been minted. But it's a good method for traceability and for checking ownership and all of these things.
And you have a lot of, let's say, the traditional artists getting involved in this space now. It's not just the new generation. Like, for example, Anish Kapoor has released some NFTs, or Ai Weiwei as well. And so more and more, let's say, the art world is just attacking this right now. And they're trying to leverage this new technology. And I guess, like you mentioned, Nono, the blockchain, right? Because everything's public, people are worried that their transactions can be traced, and they actually are. There are some people that are very good at finding out what your, let's say, alias on Bitcoin is and tracking you. There are other cryptocurrencies emerging that have privacy in mind, but then the more privacy, the less security. It's like a balancing act. And so how do you promise all the security that the blockchain offers and at the same time provide privacy? It's not a trivial problem.
It's usually the three main topics that counter each other are, I think, security, scalability, and speed of transactions, right? How many transactions per second can be done. And there's always this reference to Visa being the more capable of doing hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. What it's usually misleading is that we're talking about blockchain, but not necessarily about cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin, for instance, is the blockchain, and it's mainly focused on the value of its asset as a currency that can be converted into dollars or euros or other currencies. But here, Ethereum, what it's trying to do, and other projects as Cardano and other different chains, is platform that can hold applications and other things, right? This is why Uniswap or like the NFT technologies or smart contracts arise. There is a base layer that defines the rules of the chain, and then there's like layer 2 in which other applications and other logics can be added to, right? In this case, we're talking about NFTs, which doesn't have anything directly to do with money, but just a token that represents ownership, right? A different thing is that you buy Ethereum, which is like the currency, and you hold it because of its monetary value, and maybe in the future you sell it and then you make money or you lose money, right? There is this concept of what I mentioned before, minting. When you mint a piece of artwork or a digital file, right? What you do, and there is a process that this process happens on websites. I believe you might be able to do it with code, but for now I've seen websites like foundation.app and Nifty Gateway. So Nifty Gateway, for instance, is owned by Gemini, which is one of the big exchanges, and it's owned by Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss, some of the early founders of Facebook as well. And for example, if we read the statement of foundation.app, it says, quote, "We're bringing digital creators, crypto natives, and collectors together to move culture forward," unquote. So they're trying to create this sense of community for artists who make digital art. And when you go to one of these websites, the first thing you're prompted with is to sign up. And you have to specify your digital wallet, which is, for example, a MetaMask or Wallet Connect, which I don't have and I couldn't even sign up. But you would sign up with one of these, and then you can use some of the money, the digital currencies or cryptocurrencies that you have there, to mint artwork into the Ethereum network. Each of the minting operations, let's say generating a token, right now and every time in the future probably will cost some money. In the Ethereum network, every transaction, every operation, every smart contract you create, or everything that you do, even transferring money to other people, costs something called gas, right? That is the money or the transaction fee that you have to pay to do something on the network. So I took an example from foundation.app, an artist registered as Maxwell Step, and his artwork are motherboard 26941. The transaction fee was 0.0277 Ether, which is the Ethereum currency, which at the moment of the minting of this NFT creation was equivalent to $53.91. So you can imagine if you have to pay from $50 to $100 per artwork that you mint, this is a big investment, right? And the process of minting not only involves the creation of the NFT, but these platforms also allow you to upload maybe an MP4 video or a JPEG or a PNG or some other media assets. And it's really common to see people uploading maybe just GIFs or looping animations, maybe like a 3D model of something like shiny or anything that is moving and like rotating around in infinite loops, glitching images or some other sort of animations, right?
This transaction fee that's common is always associated with the fact that there's a lot of energy required to keep the system up, to keep Ethereum, to keep Bitcoin running, right? We're using processors or using GPUs constantly computing to keep the system alive and to keep the transactions recorded. Because of this high energy cost, we're getting these transaction fees. It's to cover that cost, basically, or at least some part of it. And so that brings us to another topic of discussion when we're talking about crypto, is the environmental impact of it. The use of energy is a little bit insane. Like Ethereum alone can power a couple of countries, I think, in the amount of energy it's requiring. And so, like all new technologies, I guess, everything will always need to adapt and upgrade to continue to be viable and interesting. And so a lot of these, I know Ethereum is heading towards greener solutions to this problem, using less energy, using sustainable sources. It falls in line with the whole cultural inclination at the moment, right? There's a universal consensus that we all need to be cleaner, that we all need to be greener.
Yeah, so there's this concept of drops on the network, right? Like in terms of NFTs, artists like you mentioned before, like Anish Kapoor or Ai Weiwei, and personally some that I have been following closely, Zach Lieberman and Mario Klingemann, and also others like Refik and Adol, right? They do these drops, right? And they try to use their already existing communities and their following, right? Because they're well-known and established artists, to gather interest around their drops, right? A drop would be a big drop of artwork. So let's say they announce, okay, next Monday, we're going to have like this new series that has like, I don't know, 5 or 10 new pieces, and each piece has a limited amount of buyers. You can buy like 10 copies of each or something, right? So they announce it, there's this big hype, and every time they do that, they actually have to mint the pieces and they have to pay the fees. So if you're actually creating, 5 or 10 NFTs every day, you're paying money. So it's not only on the interest of the environmental impact, but also on the interest of the people who are creating them. It's weird because the more expensive these things are, the fewer the people that are going to be creating them, because there are going to be people that say, oh, it's worth it to pay like $100 or $50 to do this thing. So the Ethereum network, and this is something that might affect its environmental impact as well, is moving, as I mentioned before, from proof of work to proof of stake. And the main thing with proof of stake is that the verification of transactions and operations is going to be a lot lighter in terms of computing. And apparently the way that is going to be checked that the transactions are valid is still safe. I don't fully understand it, but I know that it involves maybe 50 or 80 different computers verifying the same proof that nobody's lying about the transactions that have been made. And what this is going to do is that it's going to take the cost of every single transaction, so the cost of gas, to a lower state, to a lower price. So for example, this might mean that minting a piece of artwork now costs $1 instead of 50 or something like that. And that also implies that less energy is being used to verify these transactions. And with that comes a more sustainable and more green and environmental practice, let's say. Whether this will lead to more use of the platform and then the same energy consumption, we don't know, but at least it means that there will be less energy consumed for the same things that we're doing now. And this is a really exciting field that I still acknowledge that I don't know a lot of. There's nothing like entering a technical field to realize you know nothing about it. This is happening to me with NFTs, cryptocurrencies, machine learning, and many other things. And there are many things out of our control. Being the first one to be on the hook when the next big thing goes out is attractive. I think this is what's happening to many of the early adopters. Like they're taking advantage of this piece of technology as early as possible. You've seen with Bitcoin, people who bought and hold for long years, they now are getting the rewards. I don't know if it's other people's monies or what, but it seems like there is an opportunistic factor for whoever is looking at the newest technologies as early as they come out, are like getting the rewards afterwards. But yeah, you need effort and I think mainly attention for that.
I mean, I guess I don't know if it's safe to say most people investing in these don't necessarily understand the nooks and crannies of the whole thing, but they're just going on faith, going with the hype. So the real question is, Nono, have you bought an NFT yet or no?
I haven't. I don't know if I haven't put the time, but also I don't know how I will do it yet. Like I'm trying to learn all these things. As I told you, I don't even have a wallet. Maybe we should put this at the beginning of the episode as well. Please don't take this episode as financial advice at all or advice to spend any of your money or take financial decisions because we're no way experts. We're like just one more citizen in the world that are just trying to understand all of these new technologies that are evolving really, really fast. And yeah, I actually, just not to disclose or anything, but I've been looking at all of this because I'm also creating a piece of artwork that ends up being physical, but then scanned and digitized and published every Tuesday on my sketch.nono.ma newsletter that, I will invite you to subscribe because we're going to be publishing things related to Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and NFTs as well. There's like a lot of random topics that don't have anything to do with the other, but a lot of it has to do with process and the creative process of writing and sketching and thinking and many stories that happen to me and things that have to do with technology. And where I want to come with this is that I'm also thinking of the idea of minting or creating NFTs for my pieces of artwork that I release every Tuesday or even to the ones that I sketch every day. And maybe just see if there's any repercussion or if anyone cares. But, as I said before, I think a really big factor in all of this is having a big following already. So we're not seeing people who were well established. In the case of Zach Lieberman, it was through animations with open frameworks, like a lot of crazy shaders things and looping videos and like complex math tweaks. And in the case of Mario Klingemann, was more with machine learning and generative adversarial networks, GANs, that maybe that's, we talked about StyleGAN on the latest episode, but maybe GANs in general are a good topic to discuss in this series. It's not that you're going to create an NFT and just create value out of thin air. Some people are maybe doing that in some way, but we've commented about the $69 million. But what I've seen online is that some pieces, for example, of Zach Lieberman, some of them are sold for like $1,000 or $2,000, like maybe one Ethereum or like two Ethereum or something like that. But I've seen pieces like a looping video that maybe has sold for like $17,000. It's really weird. It's like he was selling prints of some of his artwork from $50 to $100, I think, high resolution prints or Gliese prints on a website, like printed ones. And now he's selling or auctioning looping videos for $16,000 or something like that, which to me seems crazy. He has to be like a bit confused also on what all of this means and why the people want to own his artwork. And if this is to speculate, then that's a bit weird. It's just like the way things are. If it's to create community and, support somebody who's creating and push them, it feels a bit more like a Patreon feature that people would be more willing to pay for, right? Like you're saying, this is my Patreon profile. Just give me like $5 or $10 a month for these rewards. Maybe putting that money into pieces of artwork or owning some of the work that the person has done is a lot better. At least these are the stories that we want to tell ourselves. So if you want to tell yourself that you're supporting an artist by buying 2% of their artwork, then that's what might give you joy or something. To wrap up, this was one more episode of the Getting Simple podcast, more specifically the Bytes series. We're looking for new topics to cover in future episodes. You can send your suggestions to gettingsimple.com/ask, and we'll be really happy to maybe discuss if you have questions or if you have topic suggestions. We think that this format might work. For me, at least, on other podcasts, we've been listening to people talking about different technologies and stuff. And I don't think it is until you mull over these ideas that it all starts making sense. So we're trying to digest them for you in a sort of conceptual way, a more mundane way that you can understand.
Cool. All right. Catch you guys next time on our Bytes series.
Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next time.